Hello, today I'm reviewing the Vaxee Outset AX. This mouse is Vaxee's take on the classic right-handed tilted ergonomic design, done in the style of the classic Zowie EC2 and even the IntelliMouse before it. But instead of copying these designs, they've made a few very key updates that help set this mouse apart and make it a truly top-tier ergonomic mouse in the current market. And it is also the most comfortable mouse for me personally and has a very unique feel when I use it in game. So today I want to break down the Outset AX's shape, as well as go over the key features that make Vaxee mice special, to try to help you guys understand if this ergo option is going to be right for you. Alright, let's get into it. Where I want to start is to talk about the shape. For reference, I have 18 by 9 to 9.5 centimeter hands. The overall design philosophy of this mouse is to create an asymmetric ergo design with a very prominent hump that feels tall, but also still short and stubby so it doesn't restrict your movements. And of course, it was first and foremost designed for tilt grippers because of its slanted design. That really helps you rotate your wrist and get a more natural ergonomic grip. So first I'll start with this very prominent hump. As you can see here, the Outset AX slightly flares out on each side to create a back that is wider than the front. And the front grip width is fairly wide on this mouse already, so the back flare ends up feeling a little bit larger than it may seem. In hand, it is very noticeable how bulbous and hand feeling the hump feels. This gentle curve on the right side especially helps create more hand contact. In a very ergonomic way, it naturally follows the curvature of your hand to create a lot of contact in this region. Instead of making one point of contact in this area, this entire portion of my hand gets filled. This entire region feels very supported and secure on the Outset AX due to this nice ergonomic flare. The left thumb side also has a pretty distinctive flare to create more contact, but instead the design is far more pointy instead of more rounded like it is on the right side. This makes it so that instead of filling out this entire thumb area like it would on your right side, it instead makes one very clear point of contact right here next to your thumb joint, on the meaty portion of your hand. In a more relaxed grip, you can follow the curvature with your thumb and create more contact in this area, but this back portion of the meaty area of your palm is still very hard to get contact with. The top of the hump is also relatively flat as opposed to the more curvy design that you'd find on these style of mice. This makes it so that the hump actually makes a pretty little amount of contact in this middle area of my palm and this pincher style of claw grip that I normally use. This is what helps the hump feel less restrictive despite it being so large in this style of grip. However, you can still make the hump feel very hand feeling if you flatten out your palm a little bit and place it on top. In this grip you can see that I make almost complete contact with the entirety of my hand. So this hump will feel different whether you decide to flatten out and choke up or back off it and pinch like I do. The slanted flat top design also ends up forcing your hand into a tilt grip when you use this mouse. It feels very unnatural to straighten out your wrist. The moment you try to follow the hump and get any sort of support out of it whatsoever, it'll very naturally end up tilting your wrist. If you're someone who does tilt grip, this is going to feel very natural for you. But of course, if you are someone that doesn't, it may end up feeling weird how this hand forces you into a grip that doesn't feel as comfortable. So while this mouse does have a very nice and prominent hump, it does have a very cut off back that helps it feel a little bit smaller. This is what really allows you to back off the hump and create that pincher claw grip that I was talking about earlier. Here, this entire back area of my hand is completely free from contact, which allows me to feel very free and unrestricted despite its relatively large size. Humps of this size that create this much hand contact normally end up restricting my movement, but with the Outset AX's cut-off back design, I don't feel any sort of restriction whatsoever, but still while retaining all stability, which is the main thing that I like about this mouse personally. But once again though, this feeling will vary depending on how much you choke up on this hump. If you really get up on top of it, you'll notice a little more contact in this back area of your palm and you won't see the same benefits of an increased range of motion. Instead, this hump will feel very large and may be cumbersome. Now onto the side curvature. On the left side here, there's a very prominent and very deep thumb groove. The mouse very quickly goes from being concave this way to tilting out over here on this flare. This creates a very noticeable flat spot right here, right underneath the side buttons. Right on this flat spot is where you will notice your thumb getting locked in place. This very aggressive thumb position that I use feels particularly good on the outset. Because of how deep it is recessed into the mouse, I feel it is very easy to get my thumb tip perpendicular to the side. Then because of how it's curved, I feel very locked in as well and doesn't feel like my thumb moves around at all. And of course, you could also use a very relaxed thumb position where you more follow this curve with the meaty part of your thumb. In this grip, your thumb tip still ends up in the same position right below the side buttons, but instead it hits at a much more relaxed angle. This feels just as viable and you still are just as locked in, despite it feeling so much more relaxed. The angle that the thumb groove makes also works very well with a tilt grip. You can very easily wrap your thumb up and around and get it deep into that groove. You can see here that I don't approach it straight on from the side here, but instead I wrap my thumb around from up top. This feels extremely natural and extremely comfortable because, once again, the angle of approach that the thumb groove makes. Then on the right side here, the curves are much more gentle and less aggressive. Here I feel that I have a lot of room to place my fingers right on this flat area of the curve here. No matter where I end up placing my finger up and down the flat part of the curve here, I feel like I can get a very solid, stable grip due to the slight bit of concavity that you can see here. I even have enough room to very comfortably place 2 fingers up on this area. Then on top of it, this bottom portion of the curve isn't done very aggressively, so it doesn't feel like your pinky is restricted to where it has to curl back either. This gentle but still concave curvature really helps you find a grip on this mouse that'll work out well for you personally. So many different combinations of finger positions are completely viable on this mouse, I feel. Alright, now finally, let's talk about the button height. This mouse is very tall. The buttons are even higher than you'll find on something like an EC2, an already tall mouse. To me personally, this tall button height ends up feeling very detrimental to the shape overall. I feel that it ends up changing my wrist angle completely as opposed to a more low profile mouse. This higher wrist angle and having my fingers further away from the pad ends up making it feel like I can be less precise on this mouse than other options. I think the best comparison I can make would be to painting. If you want to make very large, broad strokes with a fatter brush, you can get up higher on the handle and make broad, sweeping motions pretty easily. But if you want to do more detailed line work, you want to get a much thinner brush that you'll choke up on, and make small movements while being very close to the canvas. I feel that this ends up translating almost exactly to how I use a mouse. With a high button height, I feel that large, sweeping motions feel very good. It's extremely natural to make fast, aggressive swipes. But then the moment I want to do more fine aiming, I wish I was a little bit closer to the pad. This makes it feel to me that I have to run a little bit lower sense on this mouse than I do some of my other options. I have to lean much further into making large motions, because the small ones that I have to make don't quite feel as precise. But now, of course, this is personal preference and it will vary on how you feel about button height personally. And if you do end up choking up on this hump like I feel a lot of people will, then this change in wrist height actually isn't that relevant because you're just bringing it further up from the pad. And then half of the issue that I have just disappears. This grip does feel better and is a little bit more precise, but it's just far more comfortable for me to back off a little bit and pinch her like I normally do. Alright, so all in all, despite my issues with the button height, it is still a solid performer for me because of how comfortable it is. The grip I can get, that tilted pincher claw grip I've been talking about, feels extremely natural and like this mouse was made for it. I also get a ton of stability because of how it contacts my hand here and all throughout this area. But still, despite this extra hand contact and stability, I still feel it have a fantastic range of motion due to how cut off this back is. I feel completely unrestricted and free despite this mouse still having a fairly large hand feel. These things to me end up making for the slightly worse mouse control that I end up having with this mouse because of this higher button height. I may not be as precise as I normally would, and I will still choke sometimes because of it, but this is a mouse that I never really have to think about while using it. It feels like a very natural extension of my hand, and while doing these large motions, I feel very good and very comfortable. I still wouldn't main this mouse though because I do value consistent mouse control above all else. But this still makes a pretty good case for what comfortability can do to improve your performance, and how important it is to use a mouse that you don't have to think about. To illustrate this point a little bit better, I want to do a quick comparison to the Zowie EC3. The EC3 feels thinner at the grip and lower at the buttons. This allows my mouse control to feel consistently better overall, but it is still less comfortable because this hump is smaller, and doesn't quite fill up my hand in the same supportive way. In general, I end up preferring and performing better with the EC3, because of how much better it balances these two forces of comfortability and mouse control. Of course, the best of both worlds would be ideal, and your most comfortable mouse that you also aim the best with would be the Holy Grail. But I myself haven't found this yet, so I end up preferring to sacrifice a little bit of comfort for the sake of better mouse control, in order to get more consistent performances. Alright, now briefly, I just want to touch on the types of grips that will be viable for this mouse. I think that the Outset AX will absolutely work its best on a wide variety of claw and claw palm hybrid grips, and that this shape is actually not that viable for palm overall. You can see here that when I end up getting the most natural type of palm grip possible, my fingers end up falling out the front of the buttons, as does my ring finger. This mouse is so short and so stubby that you really aren't allowed to stretch out your fingers. But of course, if you just curl them back slightly into more of a paw-claw hybrid, it absolutely works well. Of course, you can back off it and palm it like this, but here this entire back area of your hand doesn't get any sort of contact, and it doesn't maintain that full hand feel. Therefore, you really have to curl your fingers up somewhat with this mouse. And you can't really get away with a flat grip that also maintains a lot of palm contact. And now, of course, you actually can fingertip this mouse because of how stubby it is, but I think that there are a lot of other much better options out there for you that are much smaller and much lighter. So while you can, of course, do it, I absolutely do not recommend this mouse for fingertip. Alright, so now instead of doing a full comparison to its direct competitor, the Zowie EC2C in this video here, I will instead post a full video in the coming days that directly compares these two shapes in depth. In brief, the EC2 is a little bit thinner, a little bit shorter, and the hump is less wide. But of course the differences in hand feel go much deeper than this, so stay tuned for that video. Alright, now moving on to a more general review of the features of this mouse. First of all, the build quality is absolutely perfect. No creaks, no flexes, this mouse is built like an absolute tank and you should have absolutely no issues with it. Simply put, nobody does it better than Vaxee. These are the most premium feeling mice in hand easily. They have a completely creaseless shell design so you don't feel any gaps in the shell and instead get one nice solid sheet of premium plastic. They feel incredibly solid, incredibly well made, super high quality. However, this premium plastic feel does come at the cost of an increased weight of over 80 grams with this mouse particularly. Now, even though 80 grams is pretty heavy compared to the current market, this mouse doesn't actually feel that much in hand because of how well balanced it is. When a mouse is as perfectly balanced as the Outset, you don't notice the weight as much when you're picking it up or just holding it in hand. Instead, on this mouse in particular, you end up feeling the weight when you're actually aiming and making larger swipes. It will feel slightly more clunky if you're used to more standard 70 gram mice, and especially if you come from super light options. However, I do still of course feel that this weight is workable, because of how well it's balanced. It may take you a little bit to get used to the extra mass while aiming, but I don't think it'll be too uncomfortable, and it won't actually end up feeling like a brick in hand. Alright, now onto the best thing about this mouse for me personally, which are the clicks. These are easily my favorite clicks on any other mouse, period. I think the only other main buttons that come close to these for me personally are Vaxee's other options or the M2K. These buttons in particular have a very light actuation. I do tend to accidentally click slightly more often than other mice, but it still isn't an issue. They aren't that light. Once you get used to it, it'll feel like they'll actuate very quickly and very easily, but not when you're just resting your fingers on the buttons. The actual micro switches themselves are Huano 10s, and they have a very crisp, sharp actuation with a very noticeable amount of tactile feedback. This tactile feedback feels very snappy and very responsive. If you're a fan of crisp, sharp feeling clicks that are still light and snappy, then the Outset AX is absolutely your best option. These buttons' tactile response and actual switch feel is incredible. Then on top of that, these buttons also have a very generous amount of post travel. Instead of feeling loose or spongy like some other main clicks, this post travel feels very tight and well tensioned. Well implemented post travel like this helps the main buttons feel more bouncy. Instead of bottoming out your clicks against a firm backing and having a very hard, stiff end to the click, this type of post travel makes them feel much more springy and helps them return to neutral very quickly. This, when combined with the light actuation force I was talking about earlier, makes it very easy to spam these buttons. In my opinion, well-tensioned post travel is the absolute key to making mouse buttons feel as good as possible, and Vaxee is absolutely at the forefront of this design. Plus, you can also adjust click debounce right at the bottom of the mouse here using this button. I highly recommend that everybody switch to the 2 millisecond option. This low click latency, when combined with a very quick to actuate and sharp button, ends up making click timing feel absolutely excellent on the outset. It feels so good it genuinely improves how I play. The clicks are just so responsive and so tight in this configuration that I feel extremely confident with it. Alright, now on the side buttons, which I feel are much less satisfying in comparison. They are pretty crisp with very little pre and post travel, but in my opinion the tactile response is pretty lacking. They feel somewhat hollow and just aren't quite as satisfying compared to other options like Zowie. And then to top it all off, my mouse 4 actually has a very slight QC defect. It has far more pre-travel than I've ever experienced on a Zowie side button. This makes it feel somewhat loose when you're pressing it, but still doesn't ruin the experience and is just a pretty minor fault overall. Alright, now onto the scroll wheel. This is a very tactile scroll wheel with well-defined steps. It is also tightly tensioned, which gives it a pretty bouncy feel. Overall, these scroll wheels are a very love it or hate it type thing. Personally, I love it because I'm a fan of extremely tactile wheels. I feel that the more feedback I get, the better, and this wheel absolutely offers the feedback that I want. But if you're someone who wants a smoother, less chunky feel, then this won't work for you. And of course, it is also extremely loud and scratchy sounding. I'm pretty used to this, so it doesn't bother me at all, but you will hear this through headphones for a couple days. Alright, now onto the coating. This coating has a very premium feel and feels just as high quality as the rest of the mouse. It is very slightly rubberized, which helps it feel quite grippy. I think it works pretty well for dry and slightly sweaty hands. I feel that my grip is locked in place and I don't have to worry about my fingers moving when I don't want them to. However, the one major issue I have with this arises when you have very sweaty hands. This coating itself feels somewhat hydrophobic and it feels like sweat sticks to the top of the surface and ends up beading up. Once you start to get the sweat buildup, it feels like the moisture ends up working its way between your fingers and the actual shell of the mouse itself and ends up compromising your grip. But of course, because it does feel hydrophobic, like I said, it is very easy to wipe off, and it comes completely dry and clean easily. I think that this issue will only affect people with extremely sweaty hands like me. And for the majority of people, this matte coating will work very well. So as you probably noticed, the coating on the buttons is actually different than the rest of the mouse. Instead of having the slightly rubberized feel as the rest of the shell, they use a raw, slightly textured PVD plastic. I personally like how this feels, and I find that the little bit of roughness helps give me some extra tactile feedback. It is still less grippy than the rest of the shell though, and I think some people will have some problems with their fingers sliding up and down these buttons. Then, in addition, this textured plastic picks up skin cells very easily. I have not cleaned off my mouse in a couple days, and you can see a lot of skin buildup occurring right on these main buttons. It looks pretty dirty in person, and you will have to frequently clean it to maintain a nice pristine look. Alright, now onto the stock feet. Vaxee stock feet are actually quite good and one of the best on the market in my opinion. They have a genuinely premium feeling glide for stock feet and work on a very wide variety of surfaces. Most stock feet end up having weird compatibility issues on some surfaces, but these I feel have worked very well for whatever I throw at them. Even the Skypad 2.0, which is pretty rare for stock feet. My only actual issue with them is that they feel slightly smoothed out compared to some other aftermarket options. In general, I prefer feet like core pads because they pick up a little bit more of that texture and help give you some extra feedback on surfaces. But if you are someone that likes a very smoothed out, clean glide experience, then I think you actually may like these stock feet better than aftermarket ones. Alright, now finally time to address the elephant in the room, the absolute worst part about this mouse, which is of course, the cable. As you probably know by now, Vaxee cables are not great. They are stiff and generally pretty unflexible. You could pretty easily feel the tug of the cable on these large angle motions. And it is quite heavy, so you can feel it flopping around at the end of particularly aggressive movements. The one saving grace though is that it does hold its shape pretty well. You can't completely eliminate cable drag with proper management, and you will not notice it flopping around as much as other options. But still, this cable is not great. I still think it is totally usable and have not absolutely hated my time with it, but I still think that this mouse is an absolutely fantastic paracord candidate. If this is your main, I would highly recommend you replace the cable when you can get around to it. I'm sure it'll be a much better experience for you. Alright, that's it. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to stick around the channel for an in-depth comparison between the Outset AX and the EC2C, as well as a full review of the Lethal Gaming Gear Saturn. I hope to see you in those ones.